Right. Well, first of all, it's a real pleasure and an honor for me to have been invited to speak at your conference today. I'm sure you're enjoying it and finding it useful. I keep on wanting to say good morning. Noon, right? 2 o'clock in the afternoon. For me, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. And I've already had 2 coffees so that I can try to make sense this morning. I hope I make sense for you. You can see from my first slide here that I have actually been to Novosibirsk. And in fact, I think it's the furthest east that I have ever been. I would like to go further east and explore Russia even more. And who knows, maybe one day when this crazy situation stops, maybe that will be possible. In case you don't know, I think I visited Russia 7 or 8 times. And it's one of my favorite countries to visit. So it's a real pleasure. If I can't be there, at least it's nice to be there with you online, okay? And really, really nice to see so many teachers out there. Big hello to everybody. To explain then, in the next sort of about 50 minutes, I will be talking about critical thinking and critical reading. And I will be explaining what it is, why I think it's important, and maybe most importantly, how we can integrate it into our teaching in the classroom. Before I do that, just to, I can see that there are lots of people saying lovely things in the chat box. I always like lots of interaction in the chat box, so I will almost certainly ask you questions. Please feel free to answer and make comments and maybe ask questions in the chat box, and I will try to read everything that goes in there. Before I start to talk about critical reading and critical thinking, I have some amazing news, okay, to share with you. There's some breaking news, some very important news in the world. Did you know that scientists have discovered a gigantic crystal pyramid under the Bermuda Triangle? Did you realize this? This is incredible news. And I even have some photographs, not just one pyramid, but 2. Look at them. Here they are, the underwater pyramids. And I don't know, in the chat box, you might want to tell me if you believe this is true. Have we really discovered some underwater pyramids underneath the... Right. Well, somebody is asking if it's true and somebody's saying it's not true. Okay. The reason that I'm sharing this story, and you can see that it's actually from Gateway 2nd edition, A2. This was a real text which you can find online. I say a real text. I'm not saying that the information is real. If you look, it's saying that strange underwater pyramid structures were found by Dr. Verlag Meyer, and they're made of thick glass. Now, the reason that I got interested in critical thinking and critical reading is thanks to my daughter. Now, my daughter, of course, she's my daughter, so I'm going to tell you that she's very clever. And she is very clever. She's always been very clever. And she recently achieved her master's degree in biochemistry. When she was younger, she once came up to me with this story and she said, "Dad, isn't this amazing? They've discovered these pyramids." And I found it quite fascinating that my daughter really, really did believe that it was true. And she sort of said, "Well, how do you know it's not true?" And that made me think. Our students and ourselves, we are always bombarded with stories on the internet, and we don't really always, it's not very clear what is true and what is not true. And what I thought about was, how can we prove that this story, for example, is true, or is it not true? And if you know Gateway 2nd edition, you'll know that in the life skills section, we have these questions. And I honestly do think these questions are really, really useful for all of your students, just to decide with any text, is it real or is it fake? So just these questions. Question number 1, who are the people mentioned in the text? So if you look at paragraph 1, you'll see that it mentions Dr. Verlag Mayer. And you could even do this while you're listening to me, but if you Google Dr. Verlag Mayer, he only appears in this story. He only appears in the stories about the crystal pyramids. So apart from this, he doesn't exist. So that's a good starting place. Google the name of the person in the text. Does the person really exist? Question number 2, when the text mentions scientists, experts, or people, does it say who they are or where they're from? Does it, for example, tell you that they're from the University of Oxford? Does it tell you that they're from the Spanish government? And again, if you look at this text, it talks about scientists, it talks about experts, it talks about researchers, but it never actually says who they are. So again, that's a sign that this story is maybe not true. The next question, who wrote the text? Is there a name? And who is this person? And again, this information, in this case, when you find this story on the internet, usually it doesn't say who wrote the story. But if it does say, then Google that person and find out what else they've written. Question number 4, which website is the text from? So is it from, for example, if it's from the BBC, we would probably think, being British, I would probably think that it's probably true. But if it's from some, I don't know, some strange magazine, maybe a paranormal website, in that case, I would start also becoming suspicious. Do the places in the text really exist? Well, obviously Florida exists, but they keep on talking about the Bermuda Triangle. And of course, the Bermuda Triangle is not a scientifically proven thing. It talks about K-Sal, and I can't remember if that place really exists or not, but it's certainly not much information about it. Number 6, is the text using scientific language? Is it really science or pseudoscience? In this case, we're talking about crystal cosmic rays from an energy field or a quantum vacuum. And, you know, that information is not really science. I think it's pseudoscience. By the way, Olga has said that the BBC can also publish jokes. That is true. Usually they will make it clear that it is a joke. Apart, of course, from April the 1st, that is typical. I think you know, April the 1st, even the BBC usually publishes one story, which is not true, and then they say afterwards that it's not true. Number 7, is there photographic evidence of what the text says? Does it look real? Do you know who took the photos? Well, if you remember, this was the photo. I don't know what you think, but I think that photo looks like the Great Pyramids in Egypt, and they've just made them blue. That's what I think. That doesn't look like a crystal pyramid. It looks like the real pyramids with a blue color and fuzzy. And then the last one, what is the source of the article? Is it a text that comes from another place, like a scientific or official document? Is it from a newspaper or a serious magazine? And again, it's interesting, when you find this text online, usually you can't go any further. There's nowhere that you can find where was the original source from. So this story, if we follow, I think, those 8 questions, it's pretty easy to discover that at the very least, the story is very suspicious. Yes, Anastasia, I think, is saying that a reptiloid. Yes, it definitely looks like that's a reptiloid. Sounds like it could be a part of a fake news story too. So as I say, I think this checklist would be really useful for your students, for teenage students, and maybe even for adults too, to try and decide what is true and what is not true online. Now, what is critical thinking? Let's just have a simple definition before we go any further. Now, what's interesting is that this definition, we think that critical thinking is a modern concept, but this is John Dewey. I'm sure many of you know the name John Dewey, an American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer. And he wrote this in 1910. So often in English language teaching, we think that things have just been invented yesterday. but we can see that from 1910, a very good description of critical thinking. If the suggestion that occurs is at once accepted, we have uncritical thinking, the minimum of reflection. And I think this often happens with us and with our teenage students. They read something and immediately believe it without any questioning. That is being uncritical. And he says the opposite. To turn the thing over in the mind, to reflect, means to hunt for additional evidence, for new data that will develop the suggestion and will either bear it out or else make obvious its absurdity and irrelevance. And that's really what we've done with our crystal pyramid checklist. We've questioned more, we've hunted for additional evidence, and that evidence is making the news appear to be fake and absurd. So the question about critical thinking is systematic reflection, doing a little bit of research and a little bit of extra thought. Now, why is this so important? We said that John Dewey lived in 1910, but why is critical thinking so popular at the moment? Well, I think it's precisely, in part at least, because of the internet, because we do have lots of information at our fingertips, but of course there are a lot of people putting fake information online. And I do think particularly for younger people, they have a harder time distinguishing what is true and what is not true. Yes, Anna, I agree. I keep on talking about teenagers because I teach teenagers, but I think you're right. I think a lot of what I'm saying is also relevant to adults. And we only have to look sometimes at political information, for example, in the United States, to know that some people believe anything and some people believe nothing. So I think this is all very useful for adults too, for us as human beings. So fake news is certainly a problem. Another reason I think that it's important to teach critical thinking is for autonomy and independence. So the expression that we use of thinking for yourself. And I think that's a really important skill to build up in our students. We've got this great quotation, teach children what to think and you limit them to your ideas. Teach children how to think and their ideas are limitless. I like that quotation. It's basically, I think, saying, and I'm not going to talk about this in too much detail, but I think we could divide education into a more traditional, conventional approach where we simply give students lots of information. We treat students as if they are empty and we fill them with facts, we fill them with statistics, we fill them with numbers and dates, and we then ask our students to memorize them. If we do that, we're not really encouraging our students to think at all. The opposite would be when we get our students to question things, when we get them to ask why. We're going to talk about the word why in a second because I love the question why. But I think that maybe the best educational policy is a mixture of both. Giving them some information because we can save time, but also getting them to question things and to think deeper. Another reason why I think thinking is so important for our students is that I really believe that it is becoming part of evaluation. Part of evaluation throughout school and also part of evaluation even in English and in English exams. If any of you teach the Cambridge Advanced exam, for example, it's very clear that that exam is a question of English, but it's also a question of having ideas. It's a question of knowledge of the world. It's a question of reflecting and making intelligent comments and backing them up. I am still in the classroom. I think most of you know that apart from writing Gateway, I'm still teaching every day, except the weekend, of course. But my students have to prepare this exam. This is the university entrance exam for the Madrid region of Spain. And I just want to point out question 5 is an essay. Write 100 to 150 words on this topic. What should local authorities do to improve transport and mobility in large cities? And my students, whenever I give them an essay like this, they start to complain. They start to get a little bit angry with me. And they get angry because they say, Dave, if I can't answer this question in Spanish, how can I do it in English? And that was really, again, the inspiration for Gateway to the World, the latest edition of Gateway, where I'm really trying to help students to think, because without thinking and generating ideas, the students can't answer questions like this. The evaluation criteria for the essay, 1 out of the 3 total marks is depending on whether the message is clear, precise, and coherent with interesting ideas which are relevant to the question. And the candidate can develop a personal point of view with original opinions which are adequately backed up. Now, it seems to me that these are not necessarily questions of English. Some of my students have got great English, but find it difficult to think of interesting ideas and original opinions. And so I think that's a reason we need to help our students to develop the capability to think deeper and to generate ideas. So I think we deserve it, we owe it to our students to teach English, but also to teach students to be able to answer difficult questions like this. I think the question is difficult when you're 15, 16, 17. So one last reason why I think critical thinking is important. You remember my quotation about John Dewey. We said that if you're going to be a critical thinker, you need to hunt for additional evidence, for new data. And I think that that's a great opportunity for us as teachers to give the students more meaningful texts. So in fact, if you use Gateway or if you use Gateway to the World, you should know that most, I would say 99% of the people, the things that appear in those texts, you can Google them and you can find out more information about them because they are real people, real things. And I think that what that means is that we can enrich our approach to teaching teenagers, because students can read more texts, can find out more information, can follow up what they learn in their book and find out more about it. So I think it gives us a great opportunity to give very rich real world reading texts and writing and listening texts. Now, I said before, with things like critical thinking, we think that it's something totally new. But of course, we've been doing critical thinking in our classrooms for a very long time. One of the simplest ways that we can encourage our students to think critically is simply the question why. And as I said before, the question why is, I think, a really powerful tool. So when we're doing an exercise where the students have to choose choose the correct alternative, I'm not usually very happy just when my students tell me the correct alternative. I would also like to know why they think it's the correct alternative, whether they are right or whether they are wrong. So let's ask them that question when they've done that choose the correct alternative exercise. So why do you think it's the present continuous in this case? Let's get them to think and to back up their idea, their answer. True-false exercises. So maybe the students have to do a true-false reading comprehension, and my student says number 2 is true, and maybe it's correct, maybe it's wrong, but I want to know, why do you say the answer is true? Again, we're not just going for the superficial answer, we're getting them to back up their answer, their opinion. Teaching strategies. So I think in a good English language classroom, we're going to teach them strategies, how to read more effectively, how to listen effectively, how to approach exams too. Let's ask them questions. We know that gist reading is a very good idea, but let's ask them why they think it's so useful. Why do we use the gerund? So getting them to think about grammar patterns. Often a very good approach to teaching grammar is not simply giving the answer, it's finding out what the pattern is. Let them spot the rule and tell you why they think the rule is that with this we use a gerund. So just always encouraging that question, why? And the biggest question of all, one of my, I've just read Olga's comment about science or politics from my English course books. That's actually quite funny. Yeah, that's good. And the biggest question of all, why are we doing this? And I love asking my students, whatever we've just done, maybe we've done a game, maybe we've done a song, maybe we've done an exercise from a workbook. But after doing that, simply asking the question afterwards, why? So why did we do that activity? What was the purpose? And I think it just helps students to realize, the thinking that goes behind our teaching and our lessons. And by the way, I also love it when my students ask me questions with why. So why, for example, why do we double the consonant in this word? I actually think that there's nothing so good as a good question from a student. It precisely proves that the student is thinking hard. By the way, I can see that there are some questions in the question and answer box, and I'm going to look at those questions at the end of the session, okay? So I'm not ignoring them. I'll try and answer any questions at the end there. Now, another question which is similar to why is what makes you say that? Getting students to back up their opinions in a rational way. By the way, in the chat box, I'm going to ask you, we're also going to talk today a little bit about visual literacy and working out images, a bit like our crystal pyramid images. Can anybody guess in the chat box what this image is showing? What do you think it's showing? Any ideas? It's a bit of a strange image, I think. But I'd like to know if you've got any opinions about what it could possibly be. Worms, okay, could be worms. Could be rings. Are they leaves? Crisps, right. Ekaterina is the closest, okay, with crisps. Exactly, Olga has it, okay. They are cornflakes, okay. And this is a work of art, a modern work of art, which is based on cornflakes. So the artist has looked for interesting cornflake shapes, and she has pinned them onto black pieces of card. She's given each one a number. Now, I don't know, do you think this is a good work of art, or do you think it's crazy? I don't know, what do you think? Good or crazy? Actually, I suppose crazy can be good, actually. In fact, I think, yes, why not? I mean, I think I'm going to answer my own question by saying that I think it is good and crazy. I think it's a good piece of art because what it does is it makes you think about what is art. You know, can cornflakes be art? Why? Why not? Maybe the artist doesn't know the answer to the question either, but it's making you think. Now, this is from a text from Gateway to the World, the new edition of Gateway, and it's all about different works of art, like the cornflake work of art. There's also a man who takes photos of potatoes as if they were portraits of famous people, okay? And he has lots of photos of potatoes, which are worth lots and lots of money. Now, we explain those works of art in the text and we show them, but I think it's a really interesting area. And what we do next is we ask the students, are the works of art in the text serious? Now, the important thing is not just the question, that question. I think the important thing is the second question, which is what makes you say that? This, by the way, is a routine, a thinking routine from the Harvard Project Zero, which is looking at visible thinking. But I think it's a good question. What makes you say that? Often with modern art, for example, people just say, yeah, it's rubbish or it's terrible. Okay, well, maybe it is terrible, but let's now go deeper and give me some ideas from the text. Give me some other facts. Tell me something from your experiences to justify your opinion. So what we're trying to do is trying to encourage students not just to give an immediate reaction of saying, yes, it's great, yes, it's rubbish, but thinking in more detail about why they think that. So that question for me, I think, is a really useful question, like the question, why? What makes you say that? And we can use that in the classroom all the time, really. Okay, so you know, you say that maths is your favorite subject. What makes you say that? So a useful question, I think, for us to use in the classroom. What I'm going to do now is to go through different skills that I think are all part of critical thinking and critical reading. So I'm going to break down critical thinking and critical reading into, I think, about 7 or 8 different ideas, different sub-skills. The first one is the one that we have already mentioned, separating fact from fiction. And you remember my checklist. This would be a good tool for deciding if a story is real news or if it's fake news. Okay, so that's the first one, and we've already talked about that. The next thing, which is very useful though, is identifying facts and separating them from opinions. This is one of the most basic, I think, critical reading exercises. So we can do this with any text. Any text in our course book, we can simply, at the end of the text, say, is this text mainly expressing facts or is it mainly expressing opinions? Now, I've got a text here from Gateway to the World, which is about a topic which is obviously of great concern, great interest at the moment, whether the sea level around the world is rising, how fast is it rising, and how serious is the problem. Now, you don't have to read the text, but I think if you just look at it really quickly, just look at it, just like glance at it, you'll notice that we have in that text a lot of statistics. So we've got 2016, 82 millimeters, 1983. I can see 275 million people. I can see the United Nations Atlas of the Oceans. So obviously, if you read this in a little bit more detail, I think you will find that, in fact, this text is basically a question of facts more than opinions. Of course, in a text, we could have a mixture, but the question is still valid. Is this text mainly facts, mainly opinions? That's really useful for our students, I think, when they are online, because they might look at a text and read a text and confuse facts with simply the opinion of the person writing the text. By the way, 2 things. One thing is I've mentioned already visual literacy, and one problem at the moment, I think, is sometimes deciding when photos are real or when they are fake, when they have been photoshopped. And it's not a bad idea to ask students questions about this photo here. Do they think it's real or not? Of course, this photo is fake. It's simply to get a strong reaction, right, about what London might look like if sea levels continue to rise. But sometimes it's worth, again, with our crystal pyramids, sometimes it's worth reminding our students to think about photos and think if they're real or not. And we're going to see some funny examples of this at the end of my talk.
The other thing I wanted to mention very quickly is that if you use, for example, Gateway to the World, you can be you can be reassured that all of the facts in the book have been checked at least 3 times. So one of the things that I have to do when I write a text for my books is I have to give 3 different sources which all back up these facts, because otherwise the book itself could have incorrect information. So just so that you know, apart from, say, the fake text about crystal pyramids, the facts that you will see will have at least 3 things backing them up. And if you're interested, at the back of the book, you can see where all of those facts come from. Now, my next critical thinking or critical reading skill is clarifying your own opinions about a text based on some kind of reading. So this goes back to my idea of what makes you say that. So here's a question that your students will find interesting, I think. Should school start later for teenagers? Can you think of any reasons in the chat box why it might be a good idea to start later for teenagers in particular? Does anybody know any reasons why that might be a good idea? And not only for teens, Olga, right? You'd like an extra hour in bed, right? Yeah, I think I'm with you there. Does anybody know if there could be any scientific reasons? Right, they sleep more, the girls will look better. That's a good, that's a good answer. I like that. Right, well, in fact, according to statistics, and this is explained in this text, a really interesting text, sometimes exam results have improved. So there's one example of where exam results improved from 34 to 50% better results. It's all to do with the fact that teenagers apparently, yes, exactly, Elena has just said, biological rhythms. That's true. The body clock, and apparently it's all to do with melatonin, and teenagers, it has been proved, I think, as a scientific fact, that teenagers generally sort of sleep, they go to sleep later and they need to sleep later too. Now the text gives some reasons why it could be a good reason. It also gives some reasons why it could be a bad reason. And then, as I've just sort of explained, the question then, what makes you say that? And that question, the idea here is, again, if you read the books, use ideas in the text. What we're trying to do is what John Dewey was suggesting, getting students to back things up, to research and to give extra reasons for something. So what we're saying is that simply the answer, I think it's stupid, or I think it's great, what we're saying is that's not enough, and we need to encourage our students to go a little bit further. And that would help them, for example, as I said before, to do their exams better, because they will get into the routine of always justifying their opinions. So everybody has the right to a completely different opinion. I think that's really important to remember. The same as with our cornflakes art. What we're not doing is saying there is a right or wrong opinion. What we're saying is that students need to explain, to be able to explain their opinion. Now, another very, very useful critical reading skill, particularly online, is thinking about text types and text sources. Now, again, you don't need to read this text, but you can see very quickly what type of text is this. You can see, I think, really quickly, what type of text would you imagine this is? Without reading it in detail, how could you? It's not a poem, obviously. Blog, exactly. And there's another word that I'm thinking that begins with F that you might think of. Forum, exactly. Thank you, Olga. So a forum, it's a forum, a Q&A blog. Okay, yeah, fine. Now, what is good about a blog or a forum? So it's worth thinking about this. You know, our students who will probably read lots and lots of blogs, our teenage students are probably continually parts of different forums. Well, we all know that forums can get, for example, quite nasty. They can, they're also, I mean, one of the problems is that they're not like official. So you're getting different opinions. And of course, Marina, that's a reason why they're good, isn't it? A forum is a great thing because we're getting real people's opinions and lots of them. The only problem with a forum is that you're not getting like an official answer or official information. You're getting opinions rather than facts. And so that's fine. So again, that's not saying that a forum is a bad thing. It's a very good thing. So we're thinking about advantages, but it's also worth the students thinking about some of the disadvantages. And one of the disadvantages that I can see is that you might be getting unreliable information. And again, it depends what type of forum it is. Sometimes you could have forums where everybody in the forum is agreeing that something which is maybe ethically bad is good. And so again, it's not necessarily any official point of view. So it's worth knowing who is a member of the forum, who exactly are the people who are answering. So again, I think this is really, it's just a useful thing. Remember, I'm showing you examples from Gateway to the World where we put emphasis on this type of thing. But remember, these tips that I'm giving you, you can use them with absolutely any text from any book. You could also use them with any online text. So these are simply strategies to help our students. By the way, that's Oksana, I think, as many men as many minds. That's a nice expression. I suppose we have to say today as many people as many minds. But yeah, it's a great quotation. I've never heard of that before. I should, I'm sure. Next skill. Encouraging responsible research on the net. We've talked a lot about getting students to be ready for searching online. And one important thing is students these days, maybe in Russian too, they're doing some sort of project or some sort of assignment, and they need to use the internet to search for information. What I think is useful, because I think we need to teach teenagers digital skills. We think that teenagers are digital experts, and they are in some respects, but they are still teenagers. So we need to still teach them strategies where they can use the internet responsibly and carefully. Now, I have already explained that in my book, I always have to give different sources of information for the same fact. Well, that's not a bad idea. To avoid problems like believing the crystal pyramid story, the first skill that you can see there at the top, when you find a piece of information that you want to use in your project, search for at least one other source that confirms that information. So that's just a good habit to get our students into, getting them to search for another source. Here's another idea, getting students to think about the source of the website. So again, I don't think students always realize this information, and it's very useful. By looking at the URL, they can find out which country the website is from. They can find out if it's an academic institution. They can find out if it's a government agency. They can find out if it's a non-profit organization, or they could find out if it's a business, a private business, a company. So that's just very basic information, but it's actually very, very useful information so that a student knows what type of source they are looking at. Another digital skill, just deciding if they think that the website, is it an official website? Does it belong to one person? Is the author of the website, do they have any particular interests? I think it's interesting, isn't it, that influencers were very popular because they seemed to be independent people simply telling you that a product is good because they like it. Of course, nowadays you have to be careful, right, with influencers, because some influencers are, of course, paid by companies. So the information that they might give you, there could be a particular bias to that information. And again, when you're on a website and you find a piece of information that you find maybe a little bit surprising and difficult to believe, once again, it's a good idea to check with another website and see if anybody else agrees, also gives the same information. And lastly, another one here, when you visit a website, it's important to think critically about what you find there. Are you reading facts or opinions? So this is repeating basically what I said, but just getting students to question if they think that they are facts, opinions, or if it's fake or not. So simply encouraging students to be wary, I think is a good piece of advice, to not believe everything immediately, but just to check little bits of information like the website address. Now, another thing we can do, which I think is really useful in terms of critical thinking, is just getting students to think about socio-cultural differences in a respectful way. So you can see there's a text about school food in Australia. We're getting students to read about different countries. And again, I think teenagers and maybe adults too, anything that is foreign to us sometimes seems different, sometimes seems wrong because it's not the same. I think that happens to many teenagers. So what we're getting students to do is to read about different countries, but then getting them to think in an objective way, why things maybe are different, why things are the same, but coming up with solid reasons to simply compare different cultures. And I think that respect, that respect amongst different cultures and countries is really useful to foment. By the way, I must tell you that very soon, I believe, we're going to be starting our virtual classroom exchange with Gateway to the World, which means that your school will do a project like this about school food, for example, in Russia, and they will be able to connect with another school somewhere else around the world, and they will be able to precisely exchange information and have a video conference with that other school. So that information will be coming soon. Now, a few more ideas. One is this idea of going beyond first impressions. This often happens, I think, that texts make us laugh, but then they should also make us think. I always enjoy these stories about crazy crimes, okay? And I'm just going to tell you one of these stories, which I think is quite funny. It was in America, and in a restaurant, a lady went up to a police officer who was eating, and she stole one of his chips. And he was not very happy, and he told her to stop. So she stole a second chip, and the police officer said that if she did it again, he would arrest her. And the lady stole the third chip. And the police officer, arrested her for stealing 3 chips. Now, maybe in the chat box, I'd like you to tell me, is that a crime or is that not a crime? Should the person be considered a criminal or not a criminal for stealing 3 chips? Not a crime, says Natalia. I wonder if we all agree. It's a crazy story. It is a crazy story, but it's true, okay? Not a criminal. Right, now, of course, this is, she might have a mental health problem. That's a good point, actually. Right, medical assistance needed. Badly behaved woman. I think it's a really interesting story because, as I say, it sounds funny, but then what we're doing is, again, we're getting the students to go beyond the first impression. My first impression is that it's like a silly story, but as somebody said, maybe the lady had a problem and she needs help. maybe the lady was actually really trying to provoke him. So if a police officer tells you to stop doing something, maybe it's a mark of discipline. And if the lady doesn't stop, then maybe it should be taken more seriously. Now, again, I don't know the right or wrong answer, but what we're doing is critical reading, critical thinking. We're getting the students to think a little bit. It's not just a funny story. We need to think, is there a more serious point here? Okay, now another thing we can do is to develop empathy, okay, by seeing things from other people's points of view. And I think this is a really interesting thing to do with your students. This is a story about, again, it seems funny, but it might not be funny. It's a story about 911 calls. So sometimes people call 911 simply to annoy or to disturb the emergency services. There's an example in this text of one boy who calls an ambulance to take him to hospital urgently because he says he's ill. When he arrives at the hospital, he jumps out of the ambulance, he laughs, and he says, I'm fine, I just wanted a free ride to the hospital and I haven't got money for a taxi. Now again, this could to some people sound funny. It doesn't sound funny to me, but a way to get students inside a text and thinking about it deeper is to give students a role. Each one is somebody from the story. So one student is a police officer who works at a 911 emergency call center. One person is a person who has made a fake call because they were bored and they wanted to make their friends laugh. And one of them is a person who has just tried to call 911 because they've seen an accident, which could be a serious accident. And I think this exercise really gets students thinking about how this is a really serious issue. You know, we can do this again with texts where we've got 3, 4 maybe important characters in a story, and the students take on the role of that person. And it is, you know, some students enjoy role play more than others, but I think it's a nice way to get students inside the story. And of course, afterwards, you can have a group conversation about the situation. And I think you'll find that students really appreciate how that is not a funny thing to do. Of course, it is often teenagers who do this because they don't think of the consequences. And as somebody said, I think now they have the right to, it's probably a criminal offense today, but it's good getting students just thinking of those different viewpoints. Okay, and my last critical reading skill is, it's not really one point, it's just a general point. I think critical reading is interesting because it allows you to treat complex issues. I've said a few times that I think that often there is no right or wrong answer when we're talking about some of these issues. This is an issue, a story about genetic modification, where protein from spiders has been fed to goats, and the goats produce milk which is as strong as a spider's web. And you know, this is the whole area, for example, of genetically modifying animals, genetically modifying plants, is a really complex issue. I don't think we should be scared of complex issues. I think we should encourage students to think about these difficult questions, make it clear that there is no easy answer. I think that's the message. There is no easy answer to some questions, and that is a question of life, isn't it? In the outside world, not everything is black and white. And so just to finish my talk, I just wanted to mention 3 things. The first thing is something that I've just mentioned right now. So there's sort of problems, if you like, with critical thinking and critical reading. One is that we don't always have a clear black and white answer. And of course, when we teach grammar and vocabulary, usually we do have a black and white answer. But when we talk about real world issues, we don't always have that clear black and white answer. And it's good to recognize that with our students. Number two, your opinion isn't always necessarily the right answer. I think that's important. As teachers, we need to remember, of course, when we talk about grammar and vocabulary, our answer is almost certainly the right answer. When we talk about genetically modified food or stealing chips from a police officer, our answer, the teacher's answer, is not necessarily the right answer. And finally, and I often make this, this point about any teaching, I think this is really important in the teaching of teenagers, we cannot force our students to think critically, okay? This expression in English, which I think is a great expression, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Here's a great cartoon that I keep on showing to people because it makes me laugh. The teacher is trying to encourage some critical thinking, some deeper thinking from his students. He asks at the end, are there any questions? And the student simply says no. We would like our students to think critically, but maybe they're not particularly interested, or at least all of them are not interested. But there's a great quotation that even though we can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink, but at least we are giving the students the water. We're giving them the opportunity to learn critical thinking. And that, I think, is what we have to show. Yeah, that's it. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I think that you'll probably get access to a PDF of my slides from Sherwood or from Macmillan. So you can see these slides all again later. Right, I just wanted to finish with one last thing, which is visual literacy. This is my last slide that I'm going to show, and then I'll see if we've got 5 minutes for questions. Visual literacy, getting our students to look at pictures and think about them. What do you think about this picture? Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing? I'm just going to ask you very quickly, good or bad, what you can see in the picture. I mean, we've got like graffiti here, haven't we? Most people think it's good. Okay, it's interesting because a lot of people don't like graffiti on the wall. I'm not sure if yes, somebody said, Oksana said, depends where it is. Yes, okay, well, look, this is interesting. The title is even please write on the walls. So we're even encouraging students to write on the walls. And do you know why? This is a very famous place. I wonder if anybody knows where it is. It's in Italy. And it's famous because it is the balcony next to the balcony where Romeo and Juliet are meant to have met, you know, the famous scene in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. And next to the wall, people write love messages. So in fact, it's a romantic place. This graffiti is all written by people who are in love, and they want their love to be remembered by everybody who visits. So in fact, it's an interesting case where graffiti, I personally don't like graffiti. It depends where it is, but this is an interesting example of graffiti from Verona in Italy. Okay, I finished my talk. By the way, if you ever want to join me and stay in touch, then please go to Facebook. Teach with Dave. Okay, so if you go to Facebook, Teach with Dave, I'm sure we will be able to stay in touch. I'm just seeing, right, some of the questions. So Marina says that she loves Gateway, which is really nice. Can we call critical thinking the skill of a learner, not just to choose? Yes, I think we can. I mean, okay, so it's a broad definition of critical thinking. Maybe it's not critical reading, but I would say that it is critical thinking because you're deciding, you're thinking in a rational way, and you're going beyond the simple answer. So yeah, I think Marina, I would call it critical thinking. And then Marina also answers the question about B1, B2, that's a good question. I think you're right. I think it depends on the student. If your student is a very strong B1 student, maybe they could do B2. I think if it was a whole class, I would do B1+. And then Vlad has asked how we can ask other questions apart from why more effectively. I would say, for example, a question, what makes you say that, is a good question to ask. But I think the question why is just, it's the question that I use most of the time. In fact, once when I was filming a video for Macmillan, the person said to me afterwards, wow, you do ask the question why a lot. I think it's a good question to ask. I don't know if anybody has any other questions. I'm sorry that I'm going a little bit fast at the end. I hope you found it useful. Thank you for all of the nice comments in the chat box. And now it's 9 o'clock here in Madrid, so I'm going to have my second coffee.